EFRAIM Duke was an ancient king of Calabar. He was a peaceful man and did not like war. He had a wonderful drum, the property of which, when it was beaten, was always to provide plenty of good food and drink. So, whenever any country declared war against him, he would call all his enemies together and beat his drum. Then, to the surprise of everyone on arrival, instead of fighting, the people find tables spread with all sorts of dishes: fish, fufu, palm oil chop, soup, cooked yams and okras, and plenty of palm wine for everybody to drink. By doing this, the king kept everyone in his kingdom quiet, sending his enemies away with full stomachs and in a happy and contented frame of mind. There was only one drawback to the king possessing the magic drum, and that is, if while walking on the street, the owner of the drum crossed over any stick on the road or step over a fallen tree, all the food cooked for the festi would immediately go bad, and 300 Egbo men would then appear with sticks and whips and beat the owner of the drum and all the invited guests very severely. EFRAIM Duke was a rich man. He had many farms and hundreds of slaves, a large store of kernels on the beach, and many puncheons of palm oil. He also had 50 wives and many children. The wives were all beautiful and healthy women. They were also good mothers who all had plenty of children, which was a good thing for the king's household. Every few months the king would issue invitations to all his subjects to come to a big feast. Even the wild animals are always invited. The elephants, hippopotami, leopards, bush cows, and antelopes used to come as well, for in those days there was no trouble between humans and animals, as they were friendly with humans. Whenever they were at the feast, they behaved by not killing anyone or one another. Everybody, including the animals, were all envious of the king's drum and wanted to possess it, but the king would not part with it. One morning Ikwer-Edem, one of the king's wives, took her little daughter down to the spring to wash her, as she was covered with yaws, which are bad sores all over the body. The tortoise happened to be up a palm tree, just over the spring, cutting nuts for his midday meal. While he was cutting, one of the nuts fell to the ground, just in front of the child. The little girl, seeing the good food, cried for it, and the mother, not knowing any better, picked up the palm nut and gave it to her daughter. Immediately, the tortoise saw this. He climbed down the tree and asked the woman where his palm nut was. She replied that she had given it to her child to eat. The tortoise, who very much wanted the king's drum, thought he would make plenty palaver over this and force the king to give him the drum. So he said to the mother of the child, "I am a poor man, and I climbed the tree to get food for myself and my family. Then you took my palm nut and gave it to your child. I shall tell the whole matter to the king and see what he has to say when he hears that one of his wives has stolen my food. This, as everyone knows, is a very serious crime according to native custom." Ikwer-Edem then said to the tortoise, "I saw your palm nut lying on the ground, and thinking it had fallen from the tree, I gave it to my little girl to eat, so I did not steal it. My husband the king is a rich man, and if you have any complaint to make against me or my child, I will take you before him." When she had finished washing her daughter at the spring, she took the tortoise to her husband and told him what had taken place. The king then asked the tortoise what he would accept as compensation for the loss of his palm nut, and offered him money, cloth, kernels, or palm oil, all of which things the tortoise refused one after the other. The king then said to the tortoise, "What will you take? You may have anything you like." And the tortoise immediately pointed to the king's drum and said that it was the only thing he wanted. In order to get rid of the tortoise, the king said, "Very well, take the drum," but he never told the tortoise about the bad things that would happen to him if he stepped for a fallen tree or walked over a stick on the road. The tortoise, who was very glad at this, carried the drum home in triumph to his wife and said, "I am now a rich man and shall do no more work. Whenever I want food, all I have to do is to beat this drum, and food will immediately be brought to me, and plenty to drink." His wife and children were very pleased when they heard this, and asked the tortoise to get food at once, as they were all hungry. The tortoise was only too pleased to do that, as he wished to show off his newly acquired wealth, and he was also very hungry himself. So he beat the drum in the same way as he had seen the king do when he wanted something to eat, and immediately plenty of food appeared. So they all sat down and made a great feast. The tortoise did this for 3 days, and everything went well. All his children got fat, and had as much as they could possibly eat. He was therefore very proud of his drum, and in order to display his riches, he sent invitations to the king and all the people and animals in the kingdom to come to a feast. When the people received their invitations, they laughed, as they knew the tortoise was very poor, so very few attended the feast. But the king, knowing about the drum, came, and when the tortoise beat the drum, the food was brought as usual in great confusion, but all the people sat down and enjoyed their meal very well. They were much astonished that the poor tortoise was able to entertain so many people, and told all their friends what fine dishes had been placed before them, and that they had never had a dinner as delicious as the one they just ate. The people who had not gone were very sorry when they heard this. A good feast, at somebody else's expense, is not provided every day. After the feast, all the people looked upon the tortoise as one of the richest men in the kingdom, and he was very much respected in return. No one, except the king, understood how the poor tortoise could suddenly entertain the whole kingdom so lavishly, but they all made up their minds that if the tortoise ever gave another feast, they would not refuse again. When the tortoise had been in possession of the drum for a few weeks, he became lazy and did no work, but went about the kingdom boasting of his riches, and he took to drinking too much of alcohol. One day, after he had drank a lot of palm wine at a distant farm, he started journey home carrying his drum, but having had too much to drink, he did not notice a stick in the path. He walked over the stick, and, of course, his power over the drum was broken at once. The tortoise did not know, as nothing happened at that time. He eventually arrived at his home very tired, and still not very well from having drank too much. As he entered the house, he threw the drum into a corner and went to sleep. When he woke up in the morning, the tortoise began to feel hungry, and as his wife and children were calling out for food, he beat the drum as usual. But instead of food being brought, the house was filled with Egbo men, who beat the tortoise, his wife and children, badly. At this the tortoise was very angry, and said to himself, "I asked everyone to a feast, but only a few came, and they had plenty to eat and drink. Now, when I want food for myself and my family, the Egbos came and beat me and my family up. Well, I will let the other people share the same fate, as I do not see why I and my family should be beaten when I have given a feast to all the people of the kingdom." He therefore at once sent out invitations to all the men and animals to come to a big dinner the next day at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. When the time arrived, many people came, as they did not wish to lose the chance of a free meal a second time. Even the sick men, the lame, and the blind got their friends to lead them to the feast. When they had all arrived, with the exception of the king and his wives, who sent excuses, the tortoise beat his drum as usual, and then quickly hid himself under a bench, where he could not be seen. His wife and children he had sent away before the feast, as he knew what would surely happen. Immediately he had beaten the drum, 300 Egbo men appeared with whips and started flogging all the guests who could not escape, as the doors had been closed. The beating went on for 2 hours, and the people were so badly punished that many of them had to be carried home on the backs of their friends. The leopard was the only one who escaped, as immediately he saw the Egbo men arrive, he knew that things were likely to be unpleasant, so he gave a big spring and jumped right out of the compound. When the tortoise was satisfied with the beating the people had received, he crept to the door and opened it. The people then ran away, and when the tortoise gave a certain tap on the drum, all the Egbo men vanished. The people who had been beaten were so angry that they made so much trouble with the tortoise that he made up his mind to return the drum to the king the next day. So, in the morning, the tortoise went to the king carrying the drum with him. He told the king that he was not satisfied with the drum and wished to exchange it for something else. He did not mind so much what the king gave him so long as he got full value for the drum, and he was quite willing to accept a certain number of slaves, or a few farms, or their equivalent in cloth or rods. The king, however, refused to do this, but as he was rather sorry for the tortoise, he said he would present him with a magic fufu tree, which would provide the tortoise and his family with food, provided he kept a certain condition. This the tortoise gladly consented to do. Now this fufu tree only bore fruit once a year, but every day it would drop fufu and soup on the ground. The condition was that the owner should gather sufficient food for the day, once, and not return again for more. The tortoise, thanked the king for his generosity, and went home to his wife and told her to bring her calabashes to the tree. The wife obeyed and did just so, and they were able to gather plenty of fufu and soup quite sufficient for the whole family for that day, and went back to their house very happy. That night they all feasted and enjoyed themselves. But one of the sons, who was very greedy, thought to himself, "I wonder where my father gets all these good food from? I must ask him." So, in the morning he said to his father, "Tell me, where do you get all this fufu and soup from?" But his father, the tortoise, refused to tell him. His wife, who was a very cunning woman, said to the tortoise, "If we let our children know the secret of the fufu tree, someday when they are hungry, after we have gotten our daily supply, without our knowledge, one of them might go to the tree and gather more, which will break the juju." But the envious son, being determined to get plenty of food for himself, decided to track his father to the place where he obtained the food. It was a rather difficult to do, as the tortoise always go out alone, and took the greatest care going out to prevent anyone following him. The boy, however, soon thought of a plan and got a calabash with a long neck and a hole in the end. He filled the calabash with wood ashes, which he obtained from the fire, and then took the bag which his father always carried on his back when he going out to get food. At the bottom of the bag, the boy made a small hole and inserted the calabash with the neck downwards, so that when his father walked to the fufu tree, as he walked, he would leave a small trail of wood ashes pouring on the ground behind him, showing the greedy son the way to the juju tree. The tortoise, having slung his bag over his back as usual, set out to get the daily supply of food. His greedy son followed the trail of the wood ashes, taking great care to hide himself and not let his father perceive that he was being followed. At last the tortoise arrived at the tree and placed his calabashes on the ground and collected the food for the day. His son hid and watched the father from a distance. When his father had finished and went home, the boy returned, sat under the juju tree, and had had a good meal to his satisfaction. When he got home, he said nothing to his parents, but went to bed straight to sleep as his stomach was full to the brim. The next morning he got some of his brothers, and after his father had finished getting the daily supply, they went to the tree and collected much fufu and soup for themselves as well. These continue for over a year without the knowledge of the tortoise and his wife. One day, as the tortoise got to the juju tree to get food, he placed his calabash on the ground as usual and no food dropped. Immediately, he got confused and rushed home to his family to tell them what just happened. The wife, not knowing what to do, asked the tortoise to go seek for help in knowing what happened. He went in search of the wise man called the parrot. "Parrot, please, I need to know what happened to the juju tree, that it no longer drops food for me and my family." The parrot told him what to do to be able to find out the truth of what was going on. The tortoise at 5 p.m. same day hid behind the bamboo tree as his sons were about to go out. He followed them until they got to the juju tree. The sons sat down as usual, begging the juju tree to drop food for them. It was then that the tortoise discovered that it was his children who had broken the power of the juju tree, which made it to stop providing food for the tortoise daily. From that day onwards, the tortoise had to do very hard work to get food for himself and his family.